How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, FocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak.
Hello there, welcome, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of How I Got Here. This is FocusWire and Mozio's weekly podcast where we look at the stories behind innovation and entrepreneurship in travel and transportation. Welcome everybody for tuning in. Thanks ever so much. I dare say we're delighted this week to be joined by Randy Petersen, no less. For those of you that have never heard of Randy Petersen, I'm going to give a very short introduction and he'll tell us a lot about himself. But Randy is the founder of FlyerTalk, Inside Flyer, the Freddie Awards, and has been involved in a lot in between. He actually began Inside Flyer in 1986 as a magazine. FlyerTalk began in 1995, which was one of the first, if not the first, web forums about aviation. He actually retired, there we have to put that in inverted commas, in 2015, but not before launching Boarding Area in 2008 as a web service for road warriors. It's been described by the mainstream media as the most influential frequent flyer in America and a frequent flyer guru, but this is the one that I really liked. In his own words, he says on his LinkedIn page, "I didn't invent frequent flyer program, just the news about them." So thank you very much, Randy Petersen, for joining us on How I Got Here. We're delighted that you're here.
Well, nobody's more pleased to be here than me after all these years. I finally made it. Look who I'm talking to.
Flattery will get you nowhere, Randy. But anyway, as always with the How I Got Here podcast, we start off with this very standard question, and that is, can you tell us how you got here?
Well, you know, it started in a galaxy a long, long time ago. You already named a year, 1986. Now, I'm pretty sure that that's probably a year before most of the people listening were even born. And indeed, I was the water cooler guy. You've heard stories about the guy around the water cooler. Well, that was me, working in men's retail, a chain of young men's clothing stores. And one day, I'm an Iowa farm boy, and the idea of travel was pretty distant to me. But anyway, in the retail business, I managed to travel a little bit, and I was the guy who actually figured out how to read the fine print. So I figured out the fine print of these things called frequent flyer programs, and believe it or not, I started off by believing the airlines, because the airlines at that time said, TWA told me, if you do this, Randy, you can go to Hawaii for free. Well, I did that, read the fine print, and guess what? Ended up in Hawaii for free. Thus the water cooler, because when I came back, everybody I worked with wanted to know how they could go to Hawaii for free. So I started to make things up. I invented Eastern Airlines, I invented People Express, and along the way, some people managed some free trips. And then one day I got called into the office of my boss, big VP guy. And I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm about to be fired because word around the company is I've been spending too much time at the water cooler. Anyway, a guy by the name of Rocky Sullivan said, hey, Randy, I hear you know a lot about frequent flyer programs. And instantly I knew I wasn't going to get a 2-week notice to find a new job. Anyway, he said, I can't figure out my Marriott redemption. And a light bulb went on because I would been staying in Holiday Inns all the time in the company travel policy. And all of a sudden, Rocky's asking me about how to redeem miles for Marriott's program. Anyway, I figured it out. And I also figured out Rocky's a smart guy, makes a lot of money, and he's a smart guy. Why did Rocky can't figure out Marriott? And this was in the early 80s. Anyway, I asked Rocky that question. He says, I don't have time. So along the way, I figured, you know what? I've got some time, because I did what a lot of entrepreneurs did. We fire first and then we aim. So I quit my job and forced myself to figure out how to become a publisher of frequent flyer information. So 2 days after quitting the job, Last day at work, I wake up one morning and go, what the hell have I done to myself now? No income, living in New Jersey, and no smart business plan. In fact, I don't even know what a business plan was. I was started off in college playing football, black history major of all things, and I was just a freewheeling guy. So anyway, I saw an ad from Apple Computers, figured out how to do desktop publishing, and thus Inside Flyer was off and running. Got lucky in that I found out that fellow travelers were also interested in how to fly for free. Did pretty good with that, kept playing it forward and grew from there. So Inside Flyer as a magazine got started in '86. In '87, I'm thinking, well, let me do something different. So I started to publish information on Newsnet and CompuServe in 1987 and got paid a lot of money by Prodigy, AOL and stuff because there was no free internet. And I'm thinking technology is a lovely thing. So I made some money then. And then I came up with this other dumb idea. The idea was everybody started asking me who has the best frequent flyer program. Well, Randy says, I know what's good for me, but I don't know what's good for you. So I figured I'm going to wimp out on this and I'm going to ask other people who has the best frequent flyer program. So in 1995, I came up with this idea of FlyerTalk. It was a good idea. It was really a bad idea. In the first couple months, I ended up closing FlyerTalk down. The idea was, I didn't know at the time, I was too early. Every day coming in and looking at the posts of frequent flyers, 99% of them I had to delete. The idea was the Scandinavians were ahead of me first, and they thought the internet was for picking up chicks. Everything was about where's the party, where's the girls at. So every day, if there were 100 posts, I deleted 99 of them. It was a bad idea. I should have started Match.com then, because I could have got a dating service with all the traffic of where the girls are. So anyway, I closed FlyerTalk down because it just wasn't the idea of working. A year or so went by, and then I restarted FlyerTalk with the help of a lot of employees who were my moderators, if you will, and it got started. One thing I learned is the earlier days, the wisdom of the crowd, the idea that I found other people to tell people who had the best frequent flyer program, not me. And that's how I got started in that area, is just kind of moving things forward. And then one thing about FlyerTalk is I realized that over time, there was a lot of noise and signal problems. That was the early days of the internet. And with that, I realized that on FlyerTalk, people were starting to pay attention to certain members of FlyerTalk. And they would follow them around to watch what they had to say, whether it was in a Marriott forum, an American forum, United or Southwest, it didn't really matter. So the idea was the boarding area got started then because I figured out, you know, if there's 800 posts in a forum thread, there's probably only 4 or 5 of them that had good information. So how do I filter that down so people could just see the good information and not all the other things? Thus, boarding area got started and the idea of a weblog format, and today does pretty well. So anyway, that's how I got here. It was the easy way. No business plan. I still can't read a P&L sheet. I never had any money. I still don't have any money. I started with $800. Along the way, as most entrepreneurs do, I did all the things right. I had my car repossessed. I had all of my stuff in storage and couldn't pay the rent on storage because I was going to make Inside Flyer work. I lost all my personal belongings. So indeed, my story is not unlike most other travel entrepreneurs and others in that we go all in or we don't go.
Thank you very much, Randy Petersen. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week. Right?
Yeah.
that was great. It's really interesting. So it's difficult to know where to start. I mean, obviously, with a lot of our guests, we always say we start diving in at the beginning. But I'm quite interested because the accolade I think that was given to you by, I think it was the New York Times in 1988, which was just a couple of years after you launched. That was when you were already being labelled a frequent flyer guru, which is really quite quick after just coming on the scene almost. I mean, how did you as an entrepreneur kind of get your head around the fact that you were already being lauded in the mainstream press, first of all? And the flip side to that question, Randy, is what did the airlines make of you within that short period of time?
Well, that's a really good question. I think the difference in that and the idea of guru was earlier on. Yeah, I got lucky with that. I think part of it is that I realized that I alone only had one experience, but to build up a reputation, to be authentic, if you will, for my fellow frequent travelers, I had to know what I was talking about. So I became the ultimate road warrior. 300 days a year on the road was nothing to me, but I spent my time not doing fam trips, not trying to be an influencer. I spent all my time in the offices and boardrooms of every airline and every hotel company in the world. I became an expert at reading stuff on their desk upside down. I became an expert of leaving an office and quickly writing 3 pages of notes of stuff I saw erased on bulletin boards, snippets of conversations from somebody who walked into the room while we were having a meeting and mentioned something. I became a student of the travel industry. And I think that's how the guru thing that came around, because when people ask me questions, I actually knew the answer. I knew the answer from a lot of good research. True me, I've been visited 100 countries where there's a national airline or a hotel company, from Aeroflot to Qantas, you name it, and all the places in between. And I think the guru came around from, frankly, having no competition, because earlier on, everybody told me to get a real job. That's what happens. Frequent flyer programs in the 80s were a gimmick. You know, even the head of Hyatt said, we don't think frequent flyer programs are real. People love our name Hyatt. They're not going to be influenced by this gimmicky miles and points thing. So I took advantage of the fact that everybody told me to get a real job. I took advantage of the fact that I knew, and I learned earlier on, that travel was a passion. Travel was basically the original physical social media, that people loved interacting with other travelers and getting their opinion on where to eat, where to fly, what to see, whatever it might be. And I think that's what I learned earlier on. Now, again, I had no schooling in that. It's by osmosis, no business plan, no knowledge of anything. All I saw was a commercial by Apple computers on a TV, and I became a desktop publisher. And along the way, it was frankly hard work, because I went out on the road and became an expert by doing 2 things. One is hearing, the other was listening, because I would go into the airlines and hotel companies, and I do with my fellow frequent flyers, is I'm listening to what they're saying, but I'm hearing and trying to figure out, why did they say that, and what question were they asking? So it was the whole process of that. And so along the way, I became a guru, grew my hair a little bit longer, and hey, that's the way it goes.
Just before I hand over to David, is it's interesting, you know, when you go right back to the beginning of the answer, you said, Randy, that you know, you would go into boardrooms and you would look at the notes on the wall, and you became an expert in reading things upside down, which is terrific. But how quickly were you able to get into boardrooms? I mean, that's a mean thing to be able to do quite quickly, I would presume.
Yeah, I got lucky, because first of all, there was not a lot of competition then. Everybody was still thinking that these were gimmicky programs. However, You know, there's one thing about being a kind of an Iowa farm boy. It's just the old aw shucks and friendliness of the Midwesterns, if you will. And so it was, I think it was my, and later on I was labeled as a business guy, a surfer dude type of business guy. It was kind of my relaxing, how can I help you, please and thank you type of thing. In terms of the airline, I think it was because there was a void and there was nobody doing any of that. So, and the other part of it, and this is really, really key for the industry, is as I got a few readers and occasionally USA Today or Wall Street Journal or New York Times would mention me, I would reach out to an airline because I'm trying to get connections and learn stuff about this industry. I was really, truly wanting to be a student, but they would always say, well, your members, Randy, and your readers. Well, earlier on, I was trying to figure out what they were playing with me. And what they were playing is they were trying to put everything on me in terms of their default of lack of customer service, their default of lack of marketing strategy in the early days of frequent flyer programs. And I quickly corrected them. And this is how I became an authority, because I pointed out to them, these are not my customers, these are your customers. And it took a while for that to kind of set in for the industry, because they were interested in thinking that the people, the travelers of FlyerTalk and the readers of Inside Flyer were other people. They weren't, they were owned by other people. And I was saying, no, they aren't owned by me. Their voices and opinions of you are about your product as a customer of yours. And I think that took me a while, but once that set in, they go, whoa, this guy's really serious. And he's right. These are our customers.
Nice.
So Randy, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time. First of all, I think we should introduce you to the founder of Wayne, that travel social network we interviewed in the last one, because he also has a funny experience realizing that a lot of people were using his site for dating instead of the intended reason. So you guys can maybe go off and start Match.com for travelers together. But I wanted to delve a little bit into the community you built. So there's this great story about how there's a bet between the CEO of Continental Airlines and a participant of your site about could 60 people from FlyerTalk, fly out on the all expense paid to, to Continental's headquarters, and 274 actually turned up, all with their own, paying their own expenses, let me clarify. And communities are really tough to curate and to not squash. And clearly you did a really good job of that. If people felt this, urge to all fly out. And I'd love for you to tell us a little about how you curated that community and how you kept it alive.
Yeah, that's another good question about the socialization of travel, if you will. One thing I learned earlier on is, again, there's a passion point of travel. There's also a passion point about hobbies. And I figured out earlier on that travel and miles and points as a hobby, there was an intersection there. So I took advantage of the passion of what a hobby is, whether it's needlepoint, whether it's hot rods, whether it's the BMW car club. I took that passion and funneled it into the topic of travel. But honestly, all that success had names on it, and the name wasn't Randy. The names were NJ David, Catman, Rudy, Punky, Lucky Coins, Checks Man, Radio Flyer, all the handles of the users of FlyerTalk. And then couple that with
sounds like your biker gang.
Yeah, it does. I mean, but the earlier days of the internet, you didn't really know who was on the other side of the keyboard. Was it a dog? Was it whatever it might have been? And so that's kind of the earlier thing. And the other thing I realized is that the internet, while today is keyboard to keyboard, that reality in the earlier days was, and I referenced earlier, is the physical social media. So earlier on, we started something called DO's, D-O''S. And these were meetings, if you will, of like-minded frequent travelers. So we started to do that. One of the first ones was in 1999 in Hawaii. We had 80 people show up in Hawaii who none of them had ever met each other. The idea was, and the joke was, that, wait a second, what if I flew to Hawaii and this was all a fake? It was all a game. There was nobody else on the other side of the keyboard. But that started the influx of these social media. Today, there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of these dues that occur every day all over the world, if you will. And what it is it's the idea that we can talk about travel, we can write about travel, but when I get face to face with you, the passion really comes out. And I think that's where community really started, was secondary to the wisdom of the crowd and the idea that somewhere there was an answer for every question about travel. But the other idea was, socially, I'm a person. Socially, humans love social contact. And by creating these dues and really funding them, promoting them at events of travel, around topics of miles and points. And to your point, the continental thing, well, you know, again, a CEO of an airline still, all these years later, never believed that there was truly an interest in miles and points, even though he had a gazillion people belonging to his frequent flyer program.
It almost seems like, you know, to elaborate a little bit more on that story, I think if I remember correctly, that story was the guy on FlyerTalk literally emailed the Continental CEO cold.
Yep.
And it seems like there was a time when aviation was more accessible. I can't imagine, and I've been in the travel industry for 9 years, even like me, like just emailing the American Airlines CEO cold and having him actually respond or care about my opinion. And I'm curious, you know, what do you think about the way these programs have gone and aviation in general?
Uh, you know, that's a good question as well, too, because when you've been doing this as long as I have, and being lucky at it, I've I've seen everything, and what we see today are semblances of things that I've seen before. The downside that I've never been a fan of, but I get it, business, because I'm in the C2C business. A lot of the travel people you'll talk to are B2C or B2B. They have an e-commerce motive into that, and I love that. As an entrepreneur business, I think that's great. Me, there was never an e-commerce moment. So the idea of frequent flyer programs is that when I read about the billions of dollars of credit card referrals and credit card miles and points and decisions based upon a spreadsheet, that gets to me, because I still view this as a hobbyist. And I think if we were a hobbyist and you look at Porsche changing the design of a 911, there would be an uproar among the crowd. And I think that's still the thing. But the good thing about frequent flyer programs is that today, everybody is an influencer in frequent flyer programs. When I first started, hey, guess what? There was a thing called a fax machine. You might not have heard it, but it was a pretty cool thing back in the day. Today, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, everybody has a megaphone, and frequent flyer programs have built these social units around listening to customers. So I think that's probably the biggest change through the years, in that they'd really no longer have to watch what's being said on FlyerTalk. They can watch the same thing being said in public on Facebook or Twitter.
So I have kind of two follow-up questions to that. One, how do you monetize a C2C? Like, I love that it's not B2C, not B2B, and we've interviewed, you know, a lot of people on this podcast now, and it's usually one of the two, and you're the first one to have a C2C business model. So how do you monetize that? And what is the future of, actually, now that Twitter, like you said, is doing a lot of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, well, you know, the thing that keeps me up at night still is what this dude Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey are doing. To me, competition is not about the next website about miles and points or the next blog or anything. It's what Facebook is doing and what Twitter is doing. That is truly the competition. In terms of monetization, I was lucky because I'm not really a very smart business guy. One, I still don't know how to read a P&L sheet or a business plan. I never had a business plan, never had budgets. I don't know what any of that is. So for anybody listening out there, just create the best job in the world for yourself. That's all that I did. Monetization, interestingly enough, was never a topic for me until one thing happened, and it's called internet brands. In 2007, I got a call from internet brands about wanting to buy FlyerTalk, and I had never, ever to that point thought about monetization or money, because up until 2007, I continued to fund FlyerTalk, the operations and stuff, through revenues derived from Inside Flyer. Keep moving my investment forward, if you will. But the interesting thing is that I'd never made any money from FlyerTalk because the expenses were higher than revenue. And that was back in the day when advertising is probably the only legitimate revenue. Although I wasn't as smart as the TripAdvisor guys to figure out, well, we could have made a lot of money off of booking fees or stuff like that. So the idea of monetization came around when internet brands called and said, we thinking of buying FlyerTalk. And I said no, because I had no other answer. I didn't, this is a guy with no business plan, don't really think about money, loves the fact that I have fellow travelers to chat with, and love the fact that I've got great employees. So interestingly enough, I said no 11 times, and they finally wore me down. And FlyerTalk came around, the purchase came around from actually Jerry Greenwald, who was a former CEO of United Airlines, and he was on the board of Internet Brands. And when Internet Brands thought about breaking out in travel, Jerry said, you need to talk to this Randy guy. He runs this thing called FlyerTalk. And I was pretty impressed to hear that story later on, that Jerry finally learned about FlyerTalk, which is good because he used to diss it a little bit earlier on in the earlier days. But the idea was monetization. I only learned about money when I got a wire for the purchase of FlyerTalk. That's the first time I learned about money. I didn't know what money was before then. I knew what expenses were. And my job, even after 30 years, is I only have one goal. I got to make payroll in 2 weeks. That's the only thing that I know about finance. Advertising is probably the only general thing out there. However, along with FlyerTalk, we introduced things such as called premium membership, where we would go and bundle services and ideas behind frequent flyer programs and sell those to members. So subscription-based stuff, we started that earlier on. Advertising was really nascent. I mean, it was no money. In fact, I was losing money when FlyerTalk got sold. I made some money from FlyerTalk, invested that in boarding area, and kind of moved that little bit forward.
So I've got a question for you, Randy. And with such a voice and, you know, the label of guru and the most influential person, were there points when your kind of influence actually made airlines or others actually change strategy as a result of what you'd been writing about, the influence that you had, the groundswell of opinion that you were able to create through things like FlyerTalk and stuff like that? I.e., did you almost become like a quasi-lobbyist in some respects for some things?
Yes, I did. And I say that honestly with pride, because there wasn't anything that happened, and this is the earlier years of frequent flyer program, there wasn't anything that happened where readers wouldn't call me, write me, fax me, or email me and say, Randy, we need you to fix this. We need you to have a voice. And At first, I'm not sure I was prepared for that because I'm not a community activist. I'm not a leader. I'm not a B school guy. I played football in college, and that was about it. And I wasn't team captain. So the idea of this came about, and I think I got actively involved because that's what my readers wanted me to do. So I
Yeah.
became the accidental tourist. And in essence, I became what my membership wanted me to be because I had no life plan. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I created the world's best job. You two decide, David and Kevin can decide if you've got the second best job in the world, but I claim the throne of the world's best job. Now, the idea of this responsibility, it comes with caveats because everything that happened, people would want me to fix. I couldn't fix everything, but I can tell you, I I was lucky in that I did implement a lot of change out there. And the interesting thing is, through all this, I never hired a PR firm. I never paid for traffic. I never paid for likes. Everything I did was just kind of organic. And a lot of things I would do, I wouldn't necessarily write about. It was just, that's my job. My job was to serve my readers. And I think that's the best part of what I do is I always got satisfaction thinking I was helping them and knowing I was helping them. But indeed, I did force a lot of change earlier on. And even though my prime is way past, understand that. I get it. I hope everybody else gets it. But today, yesterday, last week, I still get calls for when things aren't right in travel. Let's get Randy in here. And it's like, wow, I'm disappointed that nobody else has taken up that torch because I thoroughly believe that individuals of frequent flyer pro and travelers in general absolutely need to have a voice. And it's really difficult when there's too many voices. It's that noise to signal type thing. I became a signal type guy. And yeah, change was good. I think we kept the programs in check for some things. And I let them know behind the scenes. I said, you know what, you can do what you want, but I tell you, you're not going to be a hero to me. And, you know, there are some things that they came back on that never made the news or the headlines, and I was happy to see that. But they knew I was always honest with them, first of all. Second of all, I always paid my own way. My goal was to earn all the frequent flyer miles in the world. So when I would visit an airline, I paid for my own ticket. Yeah, they would say, hey, we'll give you a ticket. I said, no, 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 no. I don't earn miles off of non-revenue tickets. You keep your money, you run a better airline, I'll pay my way. So along the way, you know, I've got my 20, 30 million miles because I paid for those damn things and I'm pretty proud of it.
It could be many influencer and blogger can learn a thing or two from you. Just a very, very quick follow-up on that one. I mean, with the change that you were able to create within airlines and their programs, how did you, as you know, you've referenced a couple of times, Randy, you know, you're the humble farm boy. How did you kind of cope with that sense of responsibility that you had, or did you just think that was something natural that came along as part of what you were doing?
Well, you know, it's kind of like Marvel comics, if you will, in real life, and that I was a mild-mannered guy, and when I took on this mantle, if you will, of being the editor of Inside Flyer, the founder of FlyerTalk, I changed into my Superman suit. So that was kind of a different thing for me because if people know me, I mean, most people know me for my tequila collection or the idea that outside of miles and points, I'm a modern day cowboy. I go to my ranch every weekend. But the idea of miles and points, I would go from my mild mannered self and put on my Superman suit to talk to airlines or to address frequent flyers or to be out in front of what was happening. And, you know, I'll go back to something I said a little bit earlier. I have absolutely no talent for any of this success. I got lucky, right place, right time. But the nuance of the difference between listening and hearing is all that I have to think. Because every time somebody said something to me, I was thinking, why are they saying that? What is it that they're trying to learn? What is it they're trying to do with that information? So that's the subtle difference between, and a lot of people spend their time just hearing people, not really listening to people. And I think part of my 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 livelihood, if you will, and the idea that I have the world's best job is that I continue to try and figure out why you, Kevin, were asking that question, or David, or anybody else that I do out there. And you know, that's the fun part of life, and that's the social element. So
I keep saying a quick follow-up. I do have another.
oh, your time's done, Kevin. Okay, one more. Okay.
Do you think, are you trustworthy of authority because of the things that you learned through listening and as opposed to hearing, and hearing or as opposed to listening, or whatever it is? Did you find that the people that you were talking to, I mean, we were talking senior, powerful airline execs and others that are involved in programs, were you trustworthy of what they were doing?
Oh, I knew I shouldn't have given you one more question.
Sorry.
No, actually, I'm glad I gave you one more question. And uh, a good question. There's really only one answer for that, Kevin, and it's the same answer I would have had in 1986 as I have in 2020. Indeed, I was trustworthy. And I think that those who actually know me, of course, on the internet, people pretend they know you sometimes, but of those that actually know me would say that indeed, Randy does his research. He has no party line. And interestingly enough, I'm not pro frequent flyer versus pro industry. I'm absolutely in the middle. And I can say to you, Kevin, I can say to anybody listening out there are times where I had to tell frequent flyers, you're wrong on this. The industry gets this. And that's the way the world works in a real trustworthy thing.
Yeah.
I'm not on one side of things. I was never always just about the frequent flyer. I was in my role, get on my Superman outfit. My goal was to be, and I never started out to be this, to be a trustworthy arbiter. And I would look at a situation on a change with a frequent flyer program or a hotel program and what maybe some frequent flyers were doing. And I would make a judgment call on that. Some would say, oh, you deserted, Randy. You're falling in with the airlines. And I go, I can live with that, because at the same time, I slept well at night knowing that when you're in the middle, if you're always in the middle and truly in the middle, you have to believe sometimes you're going to be on one side, sometimes you're going to be on the other side. And that's still the same today from 1986 to 2020.
Very impressive. It's funny, when Kevin used the word lobbyist, I thought actually at first consumer advocate, and the more you talked, actually the word arbiter came into my mind, and then you just said it. And so I thought, I was like, oh, perfect. That's exactly kind of what I came to understand your role to be as well. But I have one last question before we let Kevin wrap it up here. Is you've alluded to this tequila collection, to this ranch, and I feel like there's some war stories we can get out of you. So, wanted to ask you, what's your top war story from all of your time with at FlyerTalk and all of your ventures?
Oh, war story, boy. It would take a couple weeks and a couple months and maybe the rest of my lifetime. War story. War story. Okay. Here it is. years ago in the earlier 90s, I got involved in, we were managing frequent flyer programs for frequent flyers. And I created basically what was the first kind of rewards manager or consolidated statement. And we had sold the idea or attracted the attention from American Express, and they adopted it and loved the idea. So we became the smallest company they had ever vetted become a full partner of American Express. And they launched the gold card in the 90s, of which this rewards manager and mileage manager was a key function of it, key part of it. We launched it. They said, you know, we think we'll get 80,000 people on the first run of this credit card. Went out, they had 220,000 on the first launch, and called me up a week later and said, can you expand up to 500,000? And I'm thinking, this is the best day of my life. This is fabulous. Went on, first month went by, second month going great, making money, tons of stuff. And of course, this is before email and all the other stuff. So every day at my office, the mailman would back up a big truck and haul out bags of these statements of frequent flyers, because what we did is we took all of the manual frequent flyer statements and consolidated those in a new statement, which was a composite of airlines, hotels, all this stuff. So anyway, life's going great. I'm thinking, this is the coolest damn thing in the world. I got a call one day from my Amex rep, and he says, do you know who Ron Allen is? And I go, well, I only know one Ron Allen. He's the CEO of Delta Airlines. And I met him and seemed like a nice guy. Why do you ask? Well, Ron Allen and Ken Chenal, the CEO of American Express at the time, were in the middle of, well, they'd got called in because Delta and American Express were in the middle of negotiating a multi-million-dollar, $100 million credit card deal. And the problem is Ron Allen has decided that they don't want American Express. And Ken Chenal said, why not? And he says, well, you got this mileage manager thing in your new credit card. The problem is all of the statements of all of our best customers are going to Colorado Springs. We no longer have any data on our frequent flyers because the home city, the resident city, which way they were doing their marketing from, was coming out of Colorado Springs. And I go, well, what's that got to do with me? And he says, well, you ever heard of the Cola Wars? And I go, yeah, Pepsi and Coke. And he says, well, we just blinked. And immediately, 20,000 square feet of new space that I'd put aside or rented out to process all these statements, I lost all that business overnight because, hey, when it comes to credit cards and big money, it talks, Randy listens. And that's my war story.
Okay, that's great. We could probably do part 2, part 3, part 4, part 10 of talking to you, Randy, but our time is up for the podcast element of our chat here today. So I'd love to say for those that are tuning in on the audio that Randy is sat here in his Superman outfit, but unfortunately he's not in his Superman outfit today. But it only goes to say, really, on behalf of David and I, thank you so much for joining us on How I Got Here. We really appreciate your time and your stories and everything that you've been able to share with us today. Thanks, Randy.
Oh, Kevin and David, thank you. You've both been around a long time. I'm big fans of yours. I know your contributions to the travel industry. It is duly noted, and thanks for being part of a great story, even my story. So thank you.
Okay, you're very kind, so thanks ever so much. So thank you very much to everybody tuning in. This has been How I Got Here. That's FocusWire and Mozio's weekly podcast where we talk to innovators and entrepreneurs behind travel and transportation. So thanks again to Randy, and from David and I, thanks ever so much for everybody tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks Thanks for listening to the How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more insight stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages, and get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at FocusWire.com. See you next week.